Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive.
I'm excited to be here.
Me too. This time we're going to be looking at Chapter 7 of Underground to Canada.
Oh, yeah, one of the good ones.
Oh, for sure. Now, just to set the scene a little bit, we're on the Riley plantation with Julie.
Right. The heat, the work.
Exactly. And, to top it all off, there's all this crazy stuff going around about Canada.
Like what? Skinning people.
Yeah. And using their hair for collars.
Oh, come on. That's outrageous.
I know, right? But you got to remember that for Julie, this is all she knows.
Sure. It's like, how do you even begin to sort through what's true and what's not?
And what's even scarier is that these rumors are totally on purpose.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about control, Keep them scared. Keep them in line.
Exactly. But thankfully, Julie Yuli's got that hope for Canada, thanks to Mammy Sally.
Mammy Sally, what a character.
Definitely a bright spot in all this darkness.
And speaking of darkness, let's talk about the Riley plantation.
Yeah, not exactly a vacation spot.
No kidding. You've got that tiny slave cabin.
Long and low, the book says.
Right. And the work. I mean, can you imagine picking cotton day in and day out under that scorching sun?
It's brutal.
Yeah.
And then there's that image of the cotton bolls bursting open, like pure white feathers from 1,000 swans.
Oh, yeah. I love that line. Beautiful imagery, but it makes you think,
Totally, like this beautiful, natural thing turned into something ugly and forced.
Exactly. And speaking of ugly, let's not forget about the punishment for those who don't meet their quota.
Ugh. 25 lashes with a cat o' nine tails.
It's one thing to read about it, but can you imagine actually seeing that happen?
I can't even imagine Julie sickens with each blow, the book says.
Which is so powerful, right? Because it shows that this violence affects everyone.
Not just the person being whipped.
It's like this collective trauma, this constant fear hanging over them.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But through it all, Julie and Liza managed to hold on to that hope for Canada.
They have to, It's what keeps them going.
All those whispered conversations, those shared dreams.
It's a tiny act of rebellion in itself.
I love that. Now, remember those crazy rumors we talked about?
The ones about Canada.
Yeah. Well, they paint a pretty terrifying picture. Canadians skinning black folks' unbearable cold.
And don't forget about those black-eyed peas.
Oh, yeah. Apparently that's all they eat.
It's almost comical how absurd these rumors are, but they serve a very real purpose.
To scare them.
Exactly. Who would want to run away to a place that sounds even worse than where you are?
It's like psychological warfare, isn't it?
Absolutely. A tactic that sadly is still relevant today.
That's so true. But anyway, back on the plantation, we get this sudden shift in the atmosphere.
What do you mean?
Well, one day, Sims is in a weirdly good mood, and even the weather's cooler than usual.
That's strange.
It's like the calm before the storm, right?
Maybe. And then bam, in walks Mr. Alexander Ross.
Talk about an entrance.
Totally. All dapper and formally dressed, not like the usual sweaty plantation owners Julie sees used to.
And his eyes. Kind and crinkled, the book says.
Oh, yeah. Such a stark contrast to Sim's glare. Makes you wonder about him.
Right. Like, what's his deal?
Well, he claims he's an ornithologist.
A what?
A bird nerd, basically. He says he needs some slave guides to help him study the local birds.
Interesting. But there's something about him, isn't there?
Totally. His speech is all clipped and fast, and his whole demeanor just screams different.
Like maybe he's not what he seems.
Maybe. And then things go from bad to worse when Jules Salili gets whipped for the first time.
Ugh, that scene is rough.
I know Sims accuses her of eavesdropping on his conversation with Mr. Rice and just lashes out.
We see that brutality firsthand and her reaction. Heartbreaking.
Terrified, but also angry, like a spark has been ignited.
Totally. It's like that whipping, as horrible as it is, just fuels her desire to escape even more.
Makes sense, though, right? Like she realizes at that point she's got nothing left to lose.
Because of her life, I guess.
Yeah, that too.
Well.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Mr. Ross sees the whole thing and does something unexpected.
What's that?
He grabs Sims's arm and pulls him away from Julie.
Whoa. I didn't remember that.
It's a small gesture, but so powerful. It's like he's saying, hey, I'm not going to stand for this.
But why? Is he really trying to help Julie, or is this just some ploy to gain Master Riley's trust?
It's a good question. And then you have Julie's observation about learning to read the thoughts of white men through their eyes.
That's deep. What do you think that means?
I think it speaks to the psychological survival tactics slaves had to develop. They couldn't just be physically strong. They had to be mentally sharp, constantly reading the room, anticipating danger.
Like a superpower born out of necessity.
Exactly. It's chilling, but also incredibly insightful.
So we've got this mix of hope and despair, brutality and resilience, all playing out on this one plantation.
And right in the middle of it all is Mr. Ross, this enigmatic figure who could be Julie Lee's salvation or her downfall.
Hmm. What do you think, listeners? What's your gut feeling about Mr. Ross?
Yeah, what are your first impressions? Oh man, that last part, it really makes you think.
Right. About Mr. Ross.
Yeah, like what's his game? Is he really here to help or is it all just a show?
And that whole chapter just, wow, so much going on.
So much is symbolism too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like that North Star.
Oh yeah. It's not just a light in the sky, right?
Definitely not. It's hope, freedom, a better life.
It's like their guiding light, you know? Especially for Giselle and Liza.
Yeah, when everything else is so uncertain, that star, it's a constant.
Promise of something better.
And, you know, it's not just the North Star. There's all these other little things, too.
Like what?
Well, like Sim's whip versus Mr. Ross's eyes.
Ooh, that's a good one. The whip, that it's obviously all about brutality and violence.
The ugliness of slavery.
Exactly. And then Mr. Ross's eyes, at least at first, they seem kind of,
Full of compassion. Maybe even a way out.
maybe. It's like Smucker's using these everyday objects to represent these huge ideas.
And it works. It makes you think about those deeper meanings.
For sure. And let's not forget about the setting itself.
Oh, yeah, the Riley plantation.
It's practically a character itself, you know?
But it's-
All that sweltering heat, the back-breaking work, the constant threat of violence.
It's like this oppressive force that weighs down on everyone.
Exactly. It's heavy stuff. But you know what I keep wondering? Why introduce Mr. Ross at this point in the story?
That's a good question.
Like Julie's just been whipped for the first time, her hope is fading, and then bam, in walks this mysterious stranger.
Right. And he's so different from all the other white men she's met.
Totally. Maybe Smucker's playing with our expectations, you know,
Yeah.
giving us a little glimmer of hope when we need it most.
But then there's that nagging doubt. Is he really who he says he is?
How do we trust him? It's like a game of who can you trust?
And I think it's brilliant how Smucker keeps us guessing.
Oh, totally. We're right there with Julie trying to figure him out.
Oh, and another thing I was thinking about, why does Julie get whipped right before Mr. Ross shows up?
You're right. It seems a little too convenient to be a coincidence.
Yeah. Like maybe Smucker's trying to show us the two extremes. You know?
Yeah. The best and the worst of humanity.
Exactly. On one hand, you have Sims, this embodiment of cruelty.
And on the other hand, you have Mr. Ross stepping in, challenging that authority.
It's like she's asking us, what would you do in this situation?
Would you stand by and watch, or would you act?
Deep stuff. And you know, it also makes me think about the agency of slaves in this system.
Their ability to make choices, you mean?
Yeah, because on one hand, they're completely stripped of their rights.
Treated like property.
Right. But then you see these small acts of resistance, these ways they hold on to their dignity.
Like sharing stories and songs.
Looking to the North Star for guidance.
And remember Julie learning to read the thoughts of white men through their eyes?
That's a powerful one. It's like she's developed this secret weapon.
A way to navigate a dangerous world.
Exactly. And then there's that ending. Oh, man.
So much uncertainty, like anything could happen.
Yeah, you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
And speaking of shoes dropping, let's give our listeners some food for thought, you know? For those essays and discussions.
Great idea.
So think about this. How do the different characters in this chapter represent different aspects of the slave experience?
Oh, that's good. Like you've got Julia Gailey. She's all about resilience and hope.
Right. And Liza, she carries the weight of all that oppression, but she still finds ways to resist.
And there's Sims, pure evil, basically.
The face of the system.
And, of course, Mr. Ross, the wild card.
The big question mark.
Figuring out how those characters interact and what they symbolize it can really help you understand the chapter on a deeper level.
For sure. And remember, there's no one right answer.
It's all about thinking critically and forming your own interpretations.
Oh.
Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Chapter 7.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
For sure. But before we go, I think we should tackle some of those tricky vocabulary words.
Yeah, good idea. Smucker definitely doesn't hold back.
Like gin house, for instance.
What even is that?
Well, it's basically where they process the cotton, you know, separate the fibers from the seeds.
It's not a fun place to be.
No, definitely not. Noisy, dusty, probably pretty miserable. And then you've got that terrifying cat o' nine tails.
Oh, yeah, a brutal reminder of the violence of that system.
It's just a word, but it carries so much weight, you know?
Absolutely. It makes you think about how language can be used to dehumanize people.
Totally. But let's move on to something a little more hopeful, shall we?
Like the North Star.
Yeah. What a powerful symbol.
Hope, freedom, a better life waiting in the north.
It's like a guiding light, isn't it? Especially for Julie and Liza.
When everything else is so uncertain, that star is a constant.
A promise that things can get better.
And remember how they use it for navigation? It wasn't just about running away, it was about finding their way to a specific destination.
Yeah, a place where they could finally be free.
Oh, and speaking of navigation, did you catch that reference to the drinking gourd?
The what?
The drinking gourd. It sounds weird, I know, but it's actually a nickname for the Big Dipper.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, escaping slaves used it to navigate just like the North Star.
So it's like the universe itself is helping them escape,
That's a beautiful way to put it. And of course, there's the word ornithologist.
which describes Mr. Ross, right?
Yep. Basically a scientist who studies birds.
But in this story, it's like so much more than that.
Right. It makes you question his motives, like, is he really just a bird nerd, or is he something else entirely?
It adds this whole layer of mystery and suspense.
Totally. Now, for all you deep divers out there who are tackling essays or prepping for discussions, I think this chapter really highlights the importance of looking beyond the surface.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Don't just focus on the plot. Think
That's
of the
true.
symbolism, the contrasts, the little details that Smucker uses to create meaning.
Like the contrast between the brutal reality of the plantation and that almost mythical vision of Canada.
Or the way she juxtaposes Sims's cruelty with Mr. Ross's seemingly kind demeanor.
These are all deliberate choices she's making to challenge us to think critically.
And remember, there's no one right way to interpret this story.
It's all about engaging with the text and forming your own conclusions.
Now, before we wrap things up, I think it's important to step back and ask ourselves, what can we learn from this story that's relevant to our lives today?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Well, for me, it's a reminder about the importance of critical thinking. Just like those slaves were misled by those crazy rumors about Canada, we're constantly being bombarded with information these days.
Especially online. It's like you can't even tell what's real anymore.
Exactly. So we have to be careful about what we believe, who we trust, and always be willing to question what we're told.
It's about being media literate, being able to sift through the noise and find the truth.
And another big takeaway is the importance of hope and resilience. I mean, despite all the horrors they faced, Julie and Liza never gave up on their dream of freedom.
It's what kept them going.
And it's a message that resonates even today. We all face challenges, setbacks, moments of despair, but it's important to remember that we have the strength to overcome them.
That keep fighting for what we believe in.
Absolutely. And finally, I think the story reminds us about the importance of empathy and compassion. By stepping into Julie's shoes, by understanding her struggles, we gain a deeper understanding of the human cost of injustice.
And that understanding can fuel our own commitment to making the world a better place,
To fighting for what's right.
to creating a more just and equitable world for everyone.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Chapter 7.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Likewise, we hope you've enjoyed the journey and that you've come away with a deeper understanding of this incredible chapter.
Keep those minds engaged and those hearts open.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.